Hi, I'm David Stein of Money for the Rest of Us, and in this video, I answer the question, will Social Security run out of money? The vast majority of Americans will be highly dependent on Social Security in retirement. Yet 77% of workers are worried that Social Security will run completely out of money by the time they retire, according to the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies. Let's look at the numbers to see if we should be concerned. Social Security is a U.S. government program for providing retirement and disability payments to its citizens. It was established in 1935, and it is by far the largest annual expenditure by the U.S. federal government, with an annual program cost of more than $900 billion, or approximately 25% of federal spending. 61 million individuals receive Social Security benefits, of which 83% are retirees or their spouse and children. 17% of recipients are disabled workers or their spouse and children. Social Security is funded primarily through payroll taxes at a rate of 12.4% of an individual's earnings, up to a maximum earnings level of $118,500. That's from 2016. You often don't see that amount because the employer usually pays half the amount while the employees pay the other half. If you're self-employed, though, you pay the entire 12.4%. 94% of Social Security funding comes through this payroll tax, and the remaining comes from income taxes on some Social Security benefit payments. If you make a lot of money in retirement, then you end up paying some tax on your Social Security benefits. Social Security retirement and disability benefits are paid out of two trust funds, one for retirement benefits and the other for disability benefits. Over a period of decades, revenue from payroll taxes exceeded the amount that was paid out in benefits. So the reserves were invested in U.S. Treasury special obligation bonds, and the interest from those securities was then credited to those trust funds. As of December 2016, the trust funds have a balance of $2.85 trillion, which is invested in these special obligation bonds issued by the U.S. Treasuries. And they pay on average an interest rate of about 3%. Here's the truth about Social Security. It's a pay-as-you-go system. So money flows in to the trust funds from taxes, and then it flows out to pay beneficiaries. The excess money gets spent by the federal government on other programs. The trust funds are just accounting entities, so they're like a big spreadsheet that holds IOUs from the federal government in the form of special obligation bonds. It's not like the trust funds have this bank account with this money in it. It's just essentially a big spreadsheet. Now, the Congressional Budget Office estimates that the Disability Trust Fund will be depleted by 2022. In other words, the amount spent each year will get bigger and bigger, and eventually the balance of that trust fund will be depleted by 2022, and the Retirement Benefits Trust Fund will be depleted by 2030. The Social Security trustees conducted a similar analysis and estimated the trust fund combined will be depleted by 2034. Now, under current law, the Social Security Administration can only make benefit payments out of the trust fund. So once they are depleted, beneficiaries will only receive benefits payments in a given year that matches the amount of tax revenue paid into the trust funds. So the question is, would Congress really cut retiree benefits when the trust funds are depleted? That seems highly unlikely, as it would be devastating to retirees and throw the country into a deep recession. So how severe would the benefit cuts be if Congress makes no changes to the Social Security program? The Congressional Budget Office estimates a worker born in the 1980s who retires at age 65 would have their initial Social Security annual retirement benefit reduced by about $6,000 or 33%. So from $24,000 down to $18,000 in 2016 if no changes are made to the program. That means Social Security would only replace 32% of the average worker's annual pre-retirement earnings, down from about 45% before the cuts. For the lowest income quintile, Social Security go from replacing 80% of pre-retirement income down to 58%. Now, Congress could close the gap between the promised benefits and the expected receipts by raising additional tax revenue. such as applying that 12.4% payroll tax to an individual's entire earnings instead of just earnings below the current ceiling of $118,500. So they made that tax change. That would mean the top quintile of earners would pay significantly more into the Social Security system than they would ultimately receive in benefits. So currently, according to the CBO, the top income quintile who was born in the 1980s are expected to pay $665,000 in taxes towards Social Security. But they receive in expected benefits about $664,000. So it matches. Now that compares to the average worker who was born in the 1980s, who is expected to pay $308,000 in payroll taxes for Social Security while receiving expected benefits of $423,000. So the average worker receives much more in Social Security benefits than they contribute in taxes. Now, an alternative approach to cutting benefits or raising taxes is for the federal government to change the rules to allow Social Security to run an annual deficit. This could be accomplished by having the government continue to pay the scheduled benefits. The federal government, as the issuer of the nation's currency, has the ability to create money by simply crediting the recipient's bank accounts if Congress elects to do so. Money is digital, it's virtual, so the federal government does not have to wait until the money arrives before it spends if it chooses so. It can simply spend by crediting Social Security recipients' bank accounts. Of course, in practice, the federal government does wait until money arrives before it spends, and if there are deficits, it covers it through government borrowings. Since 2010, the federal government has actually in practice been borrowing to cover the shortfall between Social Security receipts and beneficiary payments. Now we have these special obligation bonds, that interest is paid, and that kind of makes up the difference. But where does the government get that interest? It just borrows more money through Treasury bonds. And the federal government could continue to do that as long as budget deficits, including Social Security deficit, are modest, as they will be according to the Congressional Budget Office projections. So here's the thing. The federal government's constraint is not its ability to spend or create money. The constraint is 30 years down the road, will the private sector be making enough goods and services for retirees to buy with the money the federal government creates? And if not, then that could lead to inflation. But the true risk to Social Security is not government finances. It's whether the private sector is productive enough to produce the things that the retirees and non-retiree needs in the coming decades. Everything else is just accounting. It's spreadsheets. And so Social Security, I believe, will be there for most retirees because Congress will make the change to allow it to happen, because the truth is the federal government has the ability to spend, to reward, to pay those benefits toward retirees. The constraint is whether the private sector will be productive enough to produce the goods and services that money could be spent on. So that's a somewhat complicated explanation of Social Security. I think it'll be there. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. If you like these videos or other videos, you can subscribe to my channel below.